Today, the first series I showed you was Harlem in the 60s. Well, I want to show you that I continually shoot, so Harlem was not the end of my career. The 60s wasn't. This is going to be a series that takes place in Harlem, but it's a baptism. Anybody know what a baptism is?
Yes.
Well, this is interesting because this is a street baptism. Now, this is from the church. You see what this church is, United House of Prayer for all people. So that means they're open. White folks, anybody, white folks, Chinese, whoever wants to come up there. But they're a Baptist church. So they have this baptism. I started shooting it in 1986. I had just come back from Nigeria. Went out to get a cup of coffee at my local shop. And I saw a bunch of people in white. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this story is because I saw them and I followed them. I wanted to know what was going on that they're wearing white on a Sunday. I followed them. They were only 4 blocks from my house. I saw that it was some kind of a gathering. Went back home, got my cameras, and came up. And this is the first time I saw this event. Now, the event had been taking place from the 1940s. Now, I live originally when I first lived in Harlem, I only lived about 5 or 6 blocks from there. I have no cognizance about it happening before, but I asked them, one of the church members, they said, oh no, we've been doing this since the 40s. So what they do, people come from all over the state. The person who runs this church is named Father Divine. No, Daddy Grace, I'm sorry. This is Daddy Grace's church. There were 3 black religious leaders back in the 30s and 40s. One was Father Divine, which was a socialist. Daddy Grace was a capitalist. And there was another one called Prophet Jones, which was a hustler. Okay? So, this is Daddy Grace's church, and they turn the hose on. And that's how they baptize people, with a fire hose. This was the oldest member from the founder. So this is Father McCullough, who reigned. His reign was about 45 years after Daddy Grace had died. He's holding a fire hose. That's how they baptize people.
That's right.
Yes, he's holding the fire hose, and you'll see closer shots, but he's watering down everybody in the street, right? It was one of the projects that I always wanted to get a waterproof camera, because I'm always trying to photograph this and dodge the water at the same time. So this is what it looks like. Now, I'm photographing that, and this is the other thing. I started the project in '86, and I shoot it every other year or so. So I've been shooting it for more than 20 years, more or less. I missed it this year because the church canceled it. And they had it the following Sunday, and I had another schedule for it. And one of the things is that these is a selection of photographs out of different years. So for anybody who's going to do a project like this, some projects I've done for 30 years. I've gone to the same place back, yes, and photographed it. A couple of years later, I go back and photograph it. And that way, I can have a more powerful selection. And I wanted you to look at the rhythm in this, because there's music playing. I have a little video clip of the music. You had to hear the music. For me, this ceremony was as close to Africa as I could get in Harlem. This is when I was shooting black and white film. I always use 2 cameras. I have a long lens on one, zoom, and a shorter zoom on the other. So, because you're moving around the crowd and you're trying to catch whatever you can catch. The other thing is the screen cuts off a little bit, but you see that half circle over there? That was like a tuba. So the roundness, the full roundness of the tuba and the shape of her face. So I'm dealing with shapes and textures, but especially her expression. But look at the water, the texture of the water on her face. Now, I started using a 70 to 200. Mainly to eliminate the depth of field. So you couldn't, because there's so much happening in the background that I wanted faces to be isolated. And again, a portrait. Okay, and this is part of a documentary story. Exposure in this circumstance, you have black people, dark-skinned people wearing white clothing.
Yep.
On a bright sunny day. So it was an achievement, and that's why I go and shoot as much as I can, pull out, because I might shoot easily 100, 200 images at an event like this, maybe even more. But I might only use 10, 15, right? Because again, my entree to this is the decisive moment, trying to capture that moment that these work as individual photographs or as a story. All right, it's according to what the galleries are going to allow me to show. If so, I'd like to show about 10. If not, I could show 2 or 3 as individual photographs. And I think they stand up. Remember that all of us have spoke about black men and children. Anytime I get an opportunity, because being a single dad, and I always hear this rap about black men not being responsible. So you look at how he's holding his child. You know, and he's heading towards the water. Okay, so for me, I'm so busy moving around. And you gotta remember too, this is an event where a heck of a lot of photographers are. So you really have to avoid them because, you start to chatting and, there 4 or 5 pictures happen so I kind of just stay to myself a lot so I can see more and find out what's happening. And again, I have 2 lenses, 1 telephoto, 1 wide-angle zoom. And this whole event is about emotion. You can see the emotion that's happening in here. I mean, people really get, some people got to hold other people because they're getting rid of baptism is kind of purging your system of the bad spirits, being reborn. And you could see that some people are strongly affected by this whole ceremony. And again, the music is an intrinsic part of this whole event. Now, just look at the lines in this. This is what got me about this photograph. Now, this one, and this is the deal about, for me, having 2 cameras. Because if you got a long lens and you turn around and this is happening, so this is done with a wide-angle lens, right? But look at the woman sort of in the background. I mean, she's...
in trance.
Yes. And for me, this is like one of the highest. For me, it was like, I got this. If I only got 1 picture that day, this would be it for me. There are a couple others, but I mean, and look at the baby looking directly at this. This is who they call Father McCullough. He had been the head of the church for something like 45, 50 years. So after the founder died, he took over and ran the church for 45, 50 years. Now he passed shortly after this event, and then there were 2 other leaders that took over after him. And let me just say that this is a national organization, so they have one of this in like maybe 10 cities. That the property, and that's why I call him a capitalist, that he acquired so much money that they built churches all over the country. All right, and let me just say something quickly, a little diverse thing. But Father Divine, like I called the socialist, Father Divine was a lot more for collecting money for the people. Now, these were big, I mean, these guys had churches all over the country. But what Father Divine had, he had facilities for black people back in the 30s, 40s. When you wanted to travel from city to city, he had a place that you went to Father Divine's church, and he had a housing, it was like the YMCA, right, for black people.
I'm not sure if you know what the YMCA is. Do y'all know what the YMCA is? The YMCA is an organization in the United States called the Young Men's Christian Association. And for the most part, they provide community services a lot for free, as well as some, for an affordable rate. So they will give you housing, it may be per room, as well as it's a place where you could probably take a shower.
Inexpensive food.
Exactly, inexpensive food. So a lot of people who may not want to go to a homeless shelter
or couldn't
go.
That was the deal.
Exactly,
Where
right.
Black people had a serious problem back in the 30s and 40s, traveling, finding someplace to eat. Yeah, and let me say now, you see this particular shot, this music is going on while this whole event is taking place. Could you look at those guys' faces? Can you imagine what the music sounds? And that's another thing too, is that music that comes out of New Orleans, because it was mostly brass, that when the service, when after the War of the States ended, they had all these brass instruments. So that's why New Orleans music comes out as brass bands.
Right.
Because they had all these, because military always had bands and stuff like that. So they wound up, after the Civil War, they wound up with all these brass instruments, and they sort of floated down. So this is the only choice. Their instruments is trombones, tubas.
Right.
So all of these, and stand under this music, and it'll affect you, believe me. I guess this is part of their police force. He's got like a very official police-looking badge, right? But look at that tropical hat he has on. Right? For me, there's a lot of contradictions and surrealism in this series for me. The key part about this was, I guess in the 60s, I was in the school band and in the small combo. But when you went to music class in junior high school and high school, they had instruments that you learned how to play. And that's where jazz in New York City, this is how all these no jazz musician would say, hey man, I was able to put my hand on the horn, and if you're a good student, they let you take the horn home with you.
Right.
You understand? So when they closed down that whole music department, that's when rap started in Harlem and New York. Kids had no instruments, so they created themselves. They turned themselves into instruments. So when I see that he is an organization that's dealing with having these kids learn how to play an instrument, to me, that's a shock. And you saw little kids that could barely pick these things up. Another portrait. So when you guys, that portraits are part of this whole thing that all of us do. And I'm going after a different point, but again, it still works. And any photographer sees a good portrait, he's going to grab it. One of the things about this too is that you got to remember that there's sunny sides of the streets, there's shady sides of the streets. So you constantly have to be checking your exposure. You got to remember, this is before preview on your camera. So there ain't no preview. I don't find out what I have until I come out of the dark room.
So you pay for it.
You got to remember.
That's right. That's right.
I was one of the last people to switch it over. I don't think I got a digital 35 millimeter camera until 2010. Maybe, around 2010. You have to be there to sense what's going on there. And because it becomes exotic in the music, so I have to shake my head to keep conscious and focus on what I'm doing, right? It affects you emotionally and you feel the music. I took a series of her, and she went through a really intense series. So, she wound up bending all the way over, but then things were coming out of her nose, stuff was coming out of her mouth. And I chose this one because I thought it was the neatest one, the most true one, to show the intensity of what she was feeling, without exposing all the other part of it. Right? So that was one of the deals. So this is maybe 1 out of 3 or 4 shots, because she was feeling she was feeling the spirit. Now again, young folks with instruments. And that was one of the things that I feel really strongly about that church, that they're furthering on young people's music potential, right? Because there's nowhere else, no other programs in Harlem, or mostly in the city, where kids, other than private schools, but like public school, free access to these instruments, don't happen anymore. Now, this is the second version of this shot. I'm sorry I didn't put them together. But there were minor differences in the shot. The earlier shot had a few more people in the background. If I put them together, I still haven't figured out which one. I thought I pulled one out. But it's those kind of things where you go to shoot. And anytime you see something, you need to take a bunch of shots of it.
That's right.
Anytime, look what's going on in this shot. And it's pretty much almost the same expression. But look at the line from the man's white shirt following down to the little girl. It's amazing when you can get lines in an image like that with that much drama. Look at the woman. I mean, she's up in the heavens somewhere. And she's doing a movement that I've seen in African dance. So she's dancing, right? And this is what I meant. When I saw this, straight after, it was like a week after I got back from Nigeria, and it was like, oh, this is Africa. This is what Africans look like here. Now, I would never say that to them. I wrote a little piece, but they would be offended if I said that to anybody in the church. So I was trying to work out a relationship with them, but it didn't seem to happen.
But let's say wide angle starts really from like 35 going on down.
Now a lot of photographers are using the 16th.
Right.
Yeah, but this is what the deal is, what they do. Because they got this wide angle and they have this different vision, they stand right up. I mean, they're 2 feet away from the person and blocks every other photographer behind them. So they're competing with the cell phone people. Excuse me, but I have to deal with you guys when I'm doing an event where the cell phone people got their camera up like this. It blocks everybody. It blocks everybody behind them. Right? So always watch your back.